I'm going to start this video off with what might be a very unpopular opinion. Right now might actually be the best time to buy a new laptop. And look, I'm a huge proponent of using things until they basically die. I'm going to drive my 2018 car until the repairs outstrip the price of a new car. I'm still using a ThinkPad X1 Carbon with an 8th gen Intel CPU, and it's been used so much, listen to this. That is the telltale sign, any ThinkPad user will know this, where the device has been used so much that the soft touch material actually breaks down and starts sticking the laptop lid to the keyboard deck. But you know what? I'm still using this thing. So if you're happy with what you have, absolutely positively, don't go running out right now and feel like you need to replace it with something new. But for people who are sitting on the fence, well, you gotta hear me out here, guys. So we all know 2025 started off as a horrible year to buy a laptop. There was the RTX 5000 series flop, price claims from Nvidia that never became reality, tariffs boosting prices through the roof, and a technology plateau across the entire industry, which led to a general lack of interest among pretty much everybody. Mostly because those 2025 devices, well, they just didn't feel like all that much of an improvement over last year's models. Well, that's actually led to, guess what? Cratering sales at a time when many big manufacturers were counting on Microsoft's forced obsolescence of Windows 10 to actually boost their numbers. And a lot of the biggest brands rushed in batches of laptops right before the tariff kickoff dates here in North America. So that basically leads to a perfect storm that will actually positively affect a lot of consumers. You have high inventory and relatively low demand, which ends up leading to lower prices at the end of the year. But that is only sort of like the tip of the iceberg about why you might want to consider buying a laptop right now, guys. First of all, on the gaming laptop side, there won't be any new GPUs or processors in 2026. Intel will be pushing their Arrow Lake refreshes, which are only minor updates. And Nvidia's Super Series, well, it's looking increasingly unlikely. AMD, they won't have anything new either next year. And because of this, a lot of the gaming laptop companies won't even be updating their current designs for 2026. Literally everything is just going to be a holdover. And there's even more things that are pointing towards 2026 sort of being like a buy year before all the new technology comes out in 2027. Look, Intel's Panther Lake and Qualcomm's Snapdragon X2 Elite, they will be coming, but neither of them represents a fundamental shift forward in terms of performance and a lot of other aspects in the thin and light market. Meanwhile, AMD, well, they're just pumping out a bunch of refreshes too with their Gorgon Point architecture, which is actually just based on Strix Point that's out right now. But I think the biggest issue in 2026 will be even higher prices and likely a much slimmer availability of more affordable laptops. I know we've all had it with paying more for literally everything that's out there, but it ain't over yet. The AI boom is gobbling up literally everything it can get its hands on, which is causing insane memory price increases and little to no availability. The NAND that's used for storage, meanwhile, is climbing right alongside the memory with no end in sight. And I've been having some very honest conversations with major laptop manufacturers over the last few weeks about exactly this. And every one of them mentioned price increases of about $200 or sometimes even more next year for otherwise identical devices. And several entry-level lineups might be discontinued altogether. And those two things together will make buying a laptop next year probably a lot less affordable than it is even now. So yeah, with all those things factored into account, I think now is probably as good a time as any over the last year to jump into the laptop game if you've been debating that upgrade for a little while. Waiting a little bit longer might actually lead to a lot higher prices, especially next year. So with that being taken into account, I did want to give you guys some recommendations because we are seeing a lot of the laptops hit sort of record low prices right now. A lot of those sales, they're not great because the devices started off as very expensive to begin with. But there are a few real gems out there, and those are the ones I want to focus on in the rest of this video. All of the links those laptops and a lot of the content that we've created around them are in the description below. And I bet you didn't see the first recommendation coming. Well, with all of the Copilot BS and the insane amounts of bloat that literally sinks performance and battery life on current Windows laptops, MacBooks, they're an excellent alternative. They have amazing build quality, good performance in everyday apps, and just biblical battery life. And with prices like this, I'd argue that Apple is just laying waste to the entire sub $1,000 slim and light Windows PC market. I mean, sure, you don't get a ton of local storage, but you can still squeak in under $1,000 with the 512 gig model. And honestly, if you aren't literally tied at the hip to the Windows ecosystem, and I don't know why most people would be, it's becoming like an abusive relationship, right? Well, the MacBooks, they give you this great off-ramp to get out of that whole thing. Now, on the Windows laptop side, especially in the slim and light market, one of the main problems that's facing a lot of these manufacturers is that the margins are just so razor thin with things like tariffs, memory costs, and all those other things sort of eating into the price. But there are some really good deals that are still out there right now, like the HP OmniBook Flip X, which offers a ton for under $500, like a Ryzen AI 5 340, which uses AMD's latest CPU architecture, a good selection of ports, a 512 gig SSD, and a pretty generous 68 watt-hour battery. But just a word of warning here, we've used a bunch of OmniBooks here at the office in the last 2 years, and if our experience is anything to go by, you are going to have to uninstall a bunch of bloatware and other pre-installed apps from that OmniBook, so just be aware of that. If you wanted to jump to the Intel side and get something more compact with much better build quality and an OLED screen, the Yoga 7i with an Ultra 5 226V is a banging option right now. As a matter of fact, if you're okay pushing your budget just a bit further, the Slim 7i Aura Edition I reviewed is less than $750 right now. It's a bit thinner and lighter while also having a bit more performance overall. There's a few other options too, like the Swift 16AI that gets you an Ultra 7 226V alongside a huge, at least compared to, I guess, other slim and lights, 1TB SSD. And if you want more screen real estate, well, there's the LG Gram 17, plus getting an Ultra 7 258V, 32 gigs of memory, and a 1TB SSD in a thin and light for under $1,000, well, that's a win. Meanwhile, Dell has done some pretty eye-opening rebates on their Dell Plus lineup, a series of laptops that combines good build quality with excellent screens and surprisingly long battery life. I actually prefer these over the Dell Premium series since they use Intel's 200V Lunar Lake processors instead of the more power-hungry 200H models on the premiums. Also, if you want a bigger 16-inch size, those are getting some pretty significant price cuts too. Now, moving on to gaming laptops, and I'm gonna have some advice for you guys before getting into what we found. Look, first of all, these things, even with the discounts that we're talking about, are still very, very expensive. These rebates sort of bring them down to what I would call a quasi-normal price. You pay a lot for what you end up getting. So my focus here is very much not on the ultra high-end devices. It is on bang for buck. So the first thing you need to be on the lookout for is open box models that aren't in the best condition despite having the largest discounts. They typically aren't worth it at all. If you absolutely want to buy an open box to get the best possible price, lean towards something that's listed as excellent condition. Also, an RTX 5080 isn't worth it over the 5070 Ti in most cases. The RTX 5070 laptop GPU still has 8 gigs of VRAM. And don't ever, and I mean ever, pay more than $1,000 for an RTX 5050 or 5060 laptop, even if it has 32 gigs of memory. Well, I guess unless it's a specialized model like the thin, light, and incredibly well-built G14 or Blade 14. And speaking of that G14, yes, I'd consider $1,300 for the 5060 model to be a pretty decent price, especially since it comes with a 1TB SSD and an absolutely stunning 3K 120Hz OLED. But look, if you have that kind of cash to spend and you want a lot more horsepower with an RTX 5070 Ti, the Acer Neo 16S is a good option. And while it does cap CPU and GPU wattage at a lower point than some other laptops, it's surprisingly capable. And if you wanted to stick with a 5070 Ti while getting a huge bump upwards in terms of quality, warranty, performance, and pretty much everything else, Legion has their Pro 5i for just under $1,800, though this is pushing the absolute upper limit of what I'd spend on a 5070 Ti laptop. And personally, I'd gladly spend the extra $250 on the 5070 Ti over the 5070 version that Lenovo also has on sale. But I guess if you want to save a bit of money, this is a good option too, since the Pro 5 series is a hell of a good laptop regardless of its GPU. Then again, if you want to pay a heck of a lot less for 5070 performance, the new TUF A15 is just impossible to ignore. Plus, you get 32 gigs of memory, a really decent screen, and a 1TB SSD. Oh, and some of the best battery life we've ever seen on a gaming laptop. And remember what I said before, absolutely, positively do not spend more than $1,000 on a 5060 series laptop. And this price up here is exactly why. And speaking of RTX 5060 laptops that you might actually want to check out, well, the Lock 15 is a great example. I mean, sure, you'll need to make do with a 13th gen Intel CPU, not great battery life, and a relatively small SSD, but it does go for $900. This is another one that we reviewed pretty extensively, though that one was with an AMD CPU. Overall, I'd say you get a heck of a lot for the price, and it's literally impossible to find a laptop with this kind of build quality, upgrade options, and a 5060 for less money. Personally though, I'd actually go against my rule and pay a bit more to grab the Aero X16. I mean, sure, it pushes things above that $1,000 threshold, but you also get double the memory and storage alongside AMD's latest Zen 5 architecture, better connectivity, a huge screen upgrade, and a more portable chassis. And by this point, you might be wondering, well, where are those RTX 5090 and 5080 laptops? Where are those flagship devices? Well, there's two problems with those. First of all, the RTX 5090 might be leagues beyond everything else in terms of performance, but it's also in short supply. So you're not going to see a bunch of big discounts on those. They're flagship laptops that people with the money are still going to buy whether they're on sale or not. The other problem with the RTX 5080, on the other hand, in my opinion, every single one of them, or at least most of them, are still bloody expensive. But there are still a few that do stand out, like the Vector 16HX, which rocks a $600 discount right now, bringing it to $1,900 for a high wattage RTX 5080 and 275HX. The only small hiccup here is 16 gigs of memory, but this is by far the least expensive 5080 laptop I could find when making this video. Meanwhile, other 5080 options with 32 gigs, OLED screens, and arguably much better build quality and features like the Strix G16 and Legion Pro 7i go for about $700 more. I mean, sure, these are steep price cuts for two of the best gaming laptops around, but let's be honest here, they were wildly expensive to begin with. And speaking of insane prices, at this point in time, you might be wondering, where are the Canadian sales? We're based in Canada, right? And unfortunately, look, we are getting absolutely hosed when it comes to prices. Because of a low dollar and the tariffs, our purchasing power is at like almost an all-time low here within the last, 15 to 20 years. But there are still some deals out there that I wanted to discuss with you guys, like the Dell 14 Plus. And look, you've got to dig a little bit into the Dell site to actually find it, but there's an entry-level model with a 226V and a 512 gig SSD going for $700 Canadian. Actually, getting this level of thin and light for under $800 is almost unheard of these days. I'd actually call this the absolute best laptop deal available anywhere in Canada right now. If you wanted a bit more screen real estate, then the VivoBook 16 is, I guess, an overall good option too. It's got the latest generation AMD CPU architecture, 32 gigs of memory, and this model here has the 70 watt-hour battery upgrade. The only real limitation is its USB ports max out at just 5 gigabits per second. And as for the gaming laptops, if you thought the thin and light market was bad, well, hold on to your hats. But we did so much digging into this, and we did find two options. First of all, there's a TUF F16 with a 5060 going for about $1,500, which is a good price for one of the best bang for buck laptops on the market right now. Meanwhile, if you wanted to spend a bit more, there's also an MSI Cyborg with a 5070 and more memory, but this thing also represents a downgrade over the TUF in terms of its screen, cooling capacity, and build quality. So I guess that pretty much covers everything, and I wanted to leave this video with basically the same advice that I started with. If you are on the fence right now about buying a new laptop and maybe thinking about waiting, I would actually suggest that you don't wait. We know what's coming down the pipeline. We know that there's going to be higher prices and very much a lack of technological progression next year. Every single one of the new and really cool CPU architectures and new GPU architectures are going to be happening in 2027. 2026, like I said before, is probably going to be more of a buy year. Unfortunately, that will be tied at the hip to what seems like increasing prices to the point where next year's sale prices might look a lot like this year's regular costs, at least in the laptop market. So anyways, with all of that being said, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I hope that you appreciated a little bit of this buying advice, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, guys. Oh, and as Eber would say, spend responsibly.